Happy Monday, and welcome to another episode of Cases That Should Have Gone to the Supreme Court of Canada, but didn't. Today, we're talking about climate action. Cases that should have gone to the Supreme Court of Canada, but didn't. A group of young people in Canada, people under the age of 18 in fact, filed a constitutional challenge arguing that their charter-protected rights under Section 7 of the Charter, the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and Section 15 of the Charter, the right not to be discriminated against, were being violated by the government for not adhering to the carbon emissions targets and not having proper carbon emissions targets in place. Essentially, the argument of the young people is that the fact that they have not had the government protect the future for them means that it's going to shorten and negatively impact their lives, and it's discriminatory on the basis of age. The environment is not being preserved for people of the future. The case went to the Ontario Supreme Court, where the judge determined that the Section 15 argument, the discrimination argument, could proceed, but the argument on the basis of Section 7 of the Charter had to be thrown out on the basis of the fact that it was attempting to impose a positive obligation on the state. The state was required to adhere to carbon emissions targets and have good targets in place in order to protect the lives of people. The Court of Appeal overturned that decision and determined that it did not impose a positive obligation on the state. And although the matter has been remitted back for consideration at the Ontario Supreme Court level and the trial will proceed, this still was an important case for the Supreme Court of Canada to hear. And there are two reasons for that. The first reason is that there are very few cases that have considered the line that is drawn between a Section 7 obligation that exists that a state must follow and a Section 7 obligation that is imposed upon the state, somebody asking for a positive Section 7 obligation. And that line is not always clearly defined in the jurisprudence. This was an opportunity for the Supreme Court of Canada to get in on that issue and define the line much more clearly so that people who are arguing Section 7 violations in all sorts of different contexts across this country would have good, clear guidance from the court on it. But it was also important for the Supreme Court of Canada to have heard this case because in rendering that decision, they could have provided good guidance for the matter that's going to be heard in the lower court about how to adjudicate these types of claims where there is something that approaches a positive obligation on the state, but doesn't in fact impose a positive obligation on the state, and to craft a test that could then be applied in the lower court for what is effectively a novel type of litigation. There's never been a case like this that's been heard in Canada. And the Supreme Court of Canada could have had the opportunity to frame the issues in a way and give direction to the judges in a way that would prevent it from what's likely going to happen, which is that the matter is going to come back for another leave application before the Supreme Court of Canada. Whether or not the young people win or lose, there are going to be appeals in this case. And it's unfortunate the Supreme Court of Canada didn't try to preempt that by hearing this case initially, rendering those decisions which would be beneficial in other areas of the law, as well as beneficial in guiding the litigation in this case. Hopefully the Supreme Court of Canada does get the opportunity to hear this issue, and we do have positive rulings about carbon emissions and climate change in Canada. Cases that should have gone to the Supreme Court of Canada, but didn't. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Cases That Should Have Gone to the Supreme Court of Canada but Didn't. I'm Kyla Lee at Acumen Law Corporation. Thank you to Brazen Bull Creative for putting together these videos. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends.